just wait until they're all in.
Yeah. Hi, folks. We're just gonna give it a few moments till everybody shuffles in. But it would be nice to hear where people are from. You can let us know in the chat there. It should be open for everybody.
Montreal.
Lethbridge.
Cheryl. Welcome,
Prairie.
Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl.
Edmonton. Lots of Albertans. Not surprising. From the Gitsan. Pincher Creek.
Carl Ulrich, I know he's a professor of anthropology.
Owl River. Winnipeg.
Well, maybe we should start this, although it's lovely to see all these people joining us. They probably want to hear something.
No, I think we want to get them all in. They want to hear it from the beginning. We're good, I think. There's it takes a while to get everybody in. And I think we heard what? There was almost 500?
Well,
Yeah, I think they said 470.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, there's like 480 people registered, and so far 138 in the coming in, which is great numbers for thank you to everybody for being so prompt. Uh, that's lovely. We could probably get started anytime though.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll start. So, hi everybody, and welcome to our Council of Canadians webinar, Prairie Water Sovereignty, Scarcity, and Conservation. To start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, at least those of us who are putting on. Everybody's from several territories. In Amisquachie, Waskiagan, which means Beaver Hills House, upon which is built the city of Edmonton. Treaty 6 is a traditional gathering place, traveling route, and home of many Indigenous peoples, including the Nehiyawak or Cree, Dene, Niitsitapi or Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Haudenosaunee or Iroquois, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, and the Inuit. We commit to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation, collaboration, unity, and harmony. I would also like to acknowledge the pivotal role of Indigenous people, communities, and organizations in protecting our water through their leadership, activism, and assertion of treaty rights. Thank you all for coming, especially with the Oilers game competing with us. I want to thank the speakers for generously sharing their knowledge and expertise, and our Edmonton chapter and Prairie Council of Canadian colleagues. I also want to thank Eagle Claw Tom, our technical expert and Zoom master. Eagle is with the Council of Canadians National. We really appreciate the support the national organization provides us in running these events. Regarding the Council of Canadians, and when I finish talking here, I'll put links in the chat if you want to contact our chapter and or the national organization to join us, get involved, or donate to help us with our work. After the intro, we have speakers until 8:30, then an all-speaker panel from 8:30 to 9. Chat is open to exchange information and reactions. Please be respectful of each other and our speakers. Put questions for speakers into the Q&A. We can't field them all, but Richard will select some to pose after each presentation and during the panel. We'll be recording the event and posting it on the national site. We'll mail out a link after it's posted. Okay, so let's get moving here. Our first speaker will be Richard Mary. Richard has done a whole bunch of thinking and reading on these topics and has done a ton of work organizing this event. He is a 16-year volunteer member of the Council of Canadians Edmonton chapter with an ongoing passion for preserving and protecting an element essential to all life on the planet Earth, water. He will be setting the scene for the topics of this webinar and introducing the speakers. So take it away, Richard.
Oh, thank you, Peter. And back to you, Peter, has been my number one helper on this effort here. And I'll just say a couple of words, then I'll jump into a little slide show that I have prepared. I'll just say a couple of words of gratitude as well to people that have helped out. And Peter's mentioned most of them, but certainly Brian, I see Brian Patterson in there in Calgary is online, and thank you very much, Brian. And I want to extend, I don't know if Maud Barlow is out there, but she's been the driving force behind my participation with the council for 16 years. Anyhow, I'm just going to jump right into the presentation, and hopefully I can get onto that. It's a different format. And I'll just say a couple things about that. The focus here is going to be on water quantity. And one of the, as opposed to quality, which I know is interlinked, but the sort of the trigger for this was Mr. T down there in the US. However, I've been aware of, internal things that we should be doing. The topics I'm going to cover will include, the Trump rhetoric and what people have written about it. A couple minutes on that. Drought and water, some indicators and factors, and sometimes I don't believe that we have a drought because I live here in central Alberta, which my water comes out of the tap, and most of the bodies of water are still swimmable. But southern prairies is a different story. And I'm going to point some fingers at the water management based not on my own expertise. I don't really have any. I've just done a lot of reading on water management. So anyhow, you know who the speakers are from your registration, hopefully, and you know what they're going to talk about. Many accolades could be extended. They put a lot of their lives into this topic, and I thank them very much for showing tonight. Anyhow, Eagle, if you're ready with that slideshow, I'll just get going on that. And I don't know what people can see, but you'll just move them along then. And I can only see the top of my slide, but it may be enough. I don't know. Can you get it any bigger than that, Eagle?
No, that was full screen there, Richard. I'll just pop up the slides again. Everybody should be able to see the full slides, or as much of them as is visible. And you can just tell me next, and I'll hit the next one. Okay.
Okay, well, let's go back to that first one again. And I guess you're going to be a little bit late starting, Wendy.
That's okay.
This time, yeah.
It looks like it's a partial slide.
Oh boy, yeah, it's just a partial slide. Well, let's hope that they get better. In any case, I think I know what I was going to say. Everybody can see the picture of Mr. T there, and there are people who do take this very seriously, this threat, and of what Trump has said. And one of them is Maud Barlow, and her belief is that yes, we should be very vigilant. We never know what this guy's going to do next, but he's talked a lot. There are other people with the council that I could mention. I'll skip the names. Nick Barry Shaw, who talks about people in Canada that would actually help and support him. I think you know who they are, and I don't want to get too political here. Next, please. All right, that one's a little better. Couple of the other reasons that people believe that the Trump threat is real is, and Wendy's going to talk about this. Wendy Holm will talk about the Amisk hydroelectric project. It's a huge project in northwestern Alberta. There are these free trade, these many agreements we have on water. We've developed them over the years. CUSMA is up for renegotiation next year. You know, probably Trump is going to be pushing for to get his way. Again, I mentioned the players, they could be at any level, city level. I've got readings on these, by the way. I'm going to send you the links to all of these. Next, please. The bulk water export to the U.S. is not imminent, but needs vigilance. So I read a bunch of articles, and you'll just have to look at the picture there. You can see, again, I think Wendy may be talking about this. This is some 75 years ago. There was talk about these channels that could come out of particularly BC and Alberta uh, along the mountain areas and out of Alaska. In fact, ship water down right down into the dry parts of the states. I mentioned this guy, gentleman, sorry, Dr. John Pomeroy, who is highly regarded in the water field. He's out of the University of Saskatchewan, has talked about this conflict coming. Next, please. Bulk water is not likely. The arguments that you will see, again, real quick here, we don't have it in the prairies. The cost, $2,500 per acre foot. To do so in California, the cost is $70. So it's very costly. It's not practical. And there are the laws and agreements that are protecting us, supposedly. Also, there would be a lot of public opposition. Next, please. Canada should share even. There are people that have the nerve to talk about, I mean, we do have shared waterways, and yes, we should share, of course, reasonably and sustainably, but the graphic hopefully shows you some of them, the Great Lakes and Manitoba areas, the Milk River for another, and over into BC, the Columbia River, of course. There are some writers who have talked about, you know, we should play our part in restoring the Ogallala aquifer down in the southwestern U.S. and, for that matter, the big rivers down there, Colorado and so on. Next, please. Okay, drought. I don't even see the title there, but I can remember what it is, I think. So drought, you may have your doubts here, like I said, this part of the world or whatever part of the world, you may not see drought. The water's coming out of your tap. You don't see the streams drying up, but certainly in some parts of the southern prairies, people are intensely aware of it. And but science is science, and no conclusions are to be jumped to. Drought is being looked at as naturally occurring in some studies that I've looked at, but in particularly tying it to the ocean currents, the El Nino, the La Nina, and oscillations and so on that you'd have to read about. Of course, that's the case. We could refer to it as naturally occurring. Of course, what's happening to those ocean currents? Next. Drought indicators. So if you know, I'm a scientist by background, but I haven't worked professionally, but I believe in science, and I'm not doubting scientific rigor. David Schindler, highly recognized scientist, and Bill Donahue worked on a report 2006, huge report. This has been in my references and talked about 80 years of records. Precipitation decline is one indicator, 14% rainfall, 24% down, snowpack down 33 to 62%. You can just see the yellow where, you know, I think, I don't even see it, but I think it says serious drought on the top there. The yellow is the worst area. This is around Canada. Okay, next. Stream flow is another indicator, and I don't know if I need to read too much about this. You've seen streams go down yourself faster than usual. This is it's more of Schindler's records. I don't know if he's quoted another researcher here, but all you have to do is look at the downward trend. This goes back to 1910. Downward trends of stream flows. Well, stream flow clearly an indicator of drought. Next. And For your own eyes, you've seen this pictures like this in your outreach, in your registration. St. Mary Reservoir, Southern Alberta, down 5 meters, 11% capacity, 2024. Next. Old Man Dam Reservoir, 30% capacity, and down normally 60 to 80% full. Next. I wanted to do more on Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but anyways, as I'm saying, I'm not an expert. I'm a volunteer, done what I could here. But you should know where Lake Diefenbaker is, and the flow that it receives is mostly coming from the eastern slopes of the Rockies and from Alberta. It was down 28% 2024. Next. The glaciers. Well, a glacial melt is in some cases not as big of a factor as you might think, but in late August, typically it accounts for 8 to 20% of the flow into Calgary, so it's important to them. And the glaciers have receded. Next. That's one local one, and here's the next one. We'll really show you. This is the El Silhouette. I'm sure you've been through the Rogers Pass, 1903, 2011. Next, please. Climate change. Okay, so factors in drought and water scarcity. Again, I just looked at climate change. This is a big thing. I've been looking at it for 35 years, and I know the people, our speakers, are going to address this, but it's going to take a while to get under control, so there won't be much more said on that. But if you doubt it, then take a look at some of the graphs. This is carbon dioxide, highly positively equated or correlated causally to climate change. And this is when it's happened here since the Industrial Revolution. This goes back 800,000 years of ice core samples. Next, please. Human demand and water management. So this is the last piece here, and I'll be bringing on Wendy pretty quick here. I'm going a little over time myself. But from the readings that I've done, at least, climate change is going to take a while to go, but our management to go away, to get under control. But our management could be improved considerably. And this is just a picture of the types of uses. I think we go to the next slide. I think I'll skip that one and go to the next one. These are coming out of the Alberta Wilderness Association, by the way, a good writer from there who is now the executive director based in Canmore. By far the highest use, irrigation. And I think Ellen's going to be addressing this in detail. And then you have all the rest down the line. 2009 to 2020. What's gone up quite a bit? Oil and gas use, of course, and drilling and fracking. Next, please. A whole bunch of facts and figures. This is all out of Schindler and Donahue if you want to read what's been happening. I thought this is interesting. 4 central Alberta municipalities have banned municipal water for fracking because of the intense use that it's been, showing. Next. Dam history. So dams are another way to manage things. And of course, we do that to control floods and for a number of positive things. We need irrigation to grow food and so on. But the history is full of people that are being opposed to them. And one of our speakers today will be addressing why in detail. Next, please. Dams and irrigation. Opposition, I mentioned to you. I can't really see everything on the slide, but it's okay. I remember most of it. Opposition, I mentioned to you. The old man was heavily opposed, was approved, in fact, by Peter Lougheed in, I think, before 1992, and went ahead in spite of a lot of opposition, First Nations people, and from friends of the old man. Myself, I got involved with that from a distance. Next. Just about done here, Wendy. Alternatives to dams. So there are agronomists. I think that's the right word, agronomists, agrologists. I'm not sure the difference.
But, agrologist.
Okay. Anyways, here's a gentleman that talked about how a lot of the farmers get their allocations. They only use 60 to 80% of them typically. And then as soon as the dry year comes, there's this huge demand for more dams and more storage and on and on and on. Next, please. Other problems, well, waste. Brad Stillfox, a number of you, I'm sure, have heard of this gentleman. I'm just going to move on to Wendy here pretty quickly here. Next slide, please. Water licensing, I think somebody will talk about that. I think Martin was going to, but it's an area for you to get involved in if you want to take action on this. Next, please. And I think I'm just about done. Government responses haven't been good. They've still continued the same policies on, massive irrigation storage projects instead of conservation. The UCP has a water advisory group, apparently no water experts on it. I think that's about it then. And I'd just like to introduce Wendy Home, who has done a lot of work in northwestern Alberta. And I'll leave it at that, Wendy, without a lot of accolades, which you certainly deserve. But I'll let you introduce yourself if you could.
Okay, thanks so much, Richard, and thanks for all of your hard work in putting this together, getting 4 people to prepare presentations and all be available on the same night is not an easy feat. And just in response to Emma's comment on the comments, there are a lot of people that are apparently taping the game, so nobody should be talking about scores here at all. So I'm going to try, and I ran this through a timer and I got it in 15 minutes, but sometimes rabbit holes appear in the middle of slides, and I'm going to try and avoid the rabbit holes. I'm going to try and sort of talk from the 30,000 foot level. This is a long story. This is a long story. This story started way back, 75 years ago, and it's continuing. And that's the problem. The pieces move on the chessboard so slowly that we're not recognizing it, and we have to connect the dots. And that's the challenge that I'm going to try and present to you today. When I was a kid, going off on our summer holidays, we got these little busy books that were like $1, and they had all these puzzles and all these cool things in it, and they were connect the dots puzzles. And I can remember, because the busy books ran out so quickly, that I used to practice connecting the dots without a pencil so that I could use the puzzle longer. And really, you have to put yourself in that mindset. I haven't really talked about water in a while. I mean, this sort of goes back a number of years. So some things may have changed a little bit on the regulatory level, and I'll leave it to the other speakers to correct me if that's important. But what I'm going to tell you now really is just what I know about this issue. So let's share my slides. And okay. So I just present my credentials here just because I think when we're talking about something that's so serious, you have you want to know who's putting forward the information, how much credibility to give it. So I just start with my credentials, but really the genesis of much of my talk, and I better start my timer here so I know when I'm is work that I did with Gary Runke on the environmental impact assessment of the Site C Dam. And before we go too much farther, I just want to say that I respectfully acknowledge that I'm an uninvited settler on the unceded traditional territory of the Tsleil-Waututh Saskatchewan, Ilixin, Hahe, and Pentlatch peoples who together make up the Comox Nation. And I really recognize the privileges I enjoy. This is looking out on this is where I look out on. This is my foreshore. I recognize the privileges I enjoy living on this land as a settler. And I'm grateful to the Comox people for their past and present stewardship of these lands and of these waters. So this is the report that started it all. This is a report that a younger version of myself did for the environmental impact assessment process. That report was filed and is online in 2014. This, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is basically the drainage basin for the Peace. So here is the Williston Reservoir, which is behind the Bennett Dam. This is the Hudson's Hope Dam, and the Peace River Dam is right here. The Peace River then follows through. Can you see my little arrow in what you're seeing?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yep. So it connects up with the Slave River, goes into Slave Lake, and then flows through the Mackenzie and exits out into the north. And this is a zoning in from that 30,000 feet down. So this is the Bennett Dam, the Williston Reservoir. Here's the Peace Canyon Dam, and this is an old slide, but this is where the Site C Dam, once proposed, now reality. And then the river flows, as you'll see, into the Peace. Into Alberta, and then north. Remember that, north. This is a shot of the Peace Valley. I wonder if I can get rid of all the rest of the. I've got everybody's picture up here too, and I'm constantly moving it. Sorry. So this was the previous picture is a beautiful shot of the Peace Valley. This Peace River Valley is the only west to east running valley in the Rockies. So think of BC and think of the Rockies as coming right down through the middle of the province. This is the only way to bring anything from from west of the Rockies to east of the Rockies is through this valley. It's the only valley that goes that way. The rest are all like this. This valley is, because it's east-west running, so the sun, if you're north-south, the sun comes up in the morning and goes down at night, and you get this little window of sunshine. But in an east-west valley, you have this full sunshine from morning to night. That plus the alluvial soils. The microclimate of this area is equivalent to the Fraser Valley with higher, with the same crop capabilities of Fraser Valley with higher yields, which is remarkable. This is a shot in the middle of the construction process. As I said, it's class 1 west-east running valley with class 1 climate for agriculture, and tremendous agricultural production. This is Ken Boone's farm, just exceptional. The benefits of Site C: electricity sufficient to power under 500,000 homes. Just wanted you to think that, under 500,000 homes. In fact, according to Guy Dauncey, who wrote in the book Water, Damming the Peace, if you covered 10% of the Williston Reservoir with solar panels, which is a new idea, you would have double the amount of energy created by the Site C Dam. And the cost of Site C, it impacts 30,000 acres of agricultural land. Impacts like sloughing, bank instability, erosion. It inundates, e.g. covers with water, 15,000 acres of land. And this land, if it were in full horticulture production, has the capacity to meet the nutritional requirements of over 1 million people a year in perpetuity. Sitting on the doorstep of the Yukon and Northwest Territories, which are the most food scarce regions of Canada, this is the greengrocer. Site C was the greengrocer. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole as an agrologist. I am beyond disturbed. You also have methyl mercury poisoning of fish in the food chain. That's going right through to the Athabasca Delta and up. And this will be 3 generations of poisoning of fish and food that are important to Indigenous peoples. And it is responsible for drying, a dramatic increase in the drying out of the Athabasca Delta, which is already suffering from the first 2 dams, destruction of critical ecosystems and habitat, and 25 fish species are just no longer going there. And these are from, you'll find all this in Damming the Peace. So what happened? How did this happen? How, with relatively small benefits, 450,000 homes, huge implications. How did this happen? Well, you have to go back to, is my slide clipped there? Sorry. That's a little bit big. Anyway, you have to go back into history. So in the early 1950s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was tasked by Washington to make sure America doesn't run out of water. And so the mapping of North American water resources was undertaken under the auspices of NORAD, Northern Defense. Engineering firms were provided with the information and invited to submit plans. And in the late 1950s, dams were planned based on these plans. Dams were planned on both the Columbia and the Peace Rivers, and there was, in fact, a flood reserve placed on the Peace River Valley. When I wrote the book Water and Free Trade, I actually had the pleasure of doing a book tour, and I went through Winnipeg and I spoke to students of University of Winnipeg, urban geography students whose professor had them undertake as a class project the production of two beautiful, huge maps. These maps are like the size of you have your sliding glass doors in your house for where your coats go. Each of these maps would be one side of that door. They're huge. And the first map was all the dams. And the second map, which I'm going to show you in a minute, was all these diversions. So the Kuiper diversion, the Kiurens, Nawapa, Decker, Magnan, Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Alaska, all of these plans. First, there's this map, and then an overlay map is this map. And in a little legend in the corner, the students put in different colored pens, all of the different diversion schemes on this map. And interestingly, all of these schemes run through the Peace River Valley. But the Peace River runs north. We just saw that, right? Peace River runs north. So what are we seeing? Well, that's right. This is the map the students produced from the engineering plans. All of these colors go right through the Peace River, and it's changed direction. You see it on the Nawapa maps. Here is the Peace River. Everybody's focused on the Columbia, but so here's the Peace River, and this is shown clearly on these maps from Nawapa. Here is the Peace River. So what I discovered when I put these maps up on my sliding glass mirrored doors, the coat's behind it, they've got a little tiny arrow going up and going down. And that little tiny arrow is really, here's where the Peace continues up north, as it should, through the Athabasca Delta, but it's also going down. How does that happen? Well, turns out the annex hydroelectric project is proposed exactly where those two little arrows, one goes up, one goes down on these maps from the 1950s. And the annex dam project, hydroelectric project, is fairly advanced. There are things online about it. There are images. Here's where that's the next one. Here's where the little dam is, right? And underwriting these continental water sharing plans are the trade agreements, which, starting with the FTA in 1988, continuing through the NAFTA and the CUSMA, these are like Russian dolls. If one collapses, you go down to the second, you go down to the first. So a lot of the FTA was ported into the NAFTA, for example. The trade agreements, all of the trade agreements refer to the harmonized commodity coding system of the GATT, WTO, to define goods, services, and investments. The only time something is mentioned is when there is an exception, like for raw logs. If it's not mentioned, it's covered. And as John Crosby, bless his little black heart, said, nothing in the trade agreement mentions water. Well, that's right, because it wasn't exempted. It does mention tariff item 2201.9. In fact, it's explicitly included in the list of goods for agriculture. But all of the goods under the harmonized commodity coding system are covered by the trade agreements. There were a lot of suggestions that water in its natural state is not covered. Don't worry, Canadians, it's not covered. Well, water in its natural state, where Mother Nature sends it, is not covered. But once commerce removes water from its natural state and either impounds it behind a dam, bottles it in a bottle, pumps it into a reservoir, a drainage ditch, diverts it, uses it to make snow. Whenever we take that water that Mother Nature would do, hold it back so we have August irrigation because the river doesn't give water in August and the farmers need it. Whenever we do something different with that water than what Mother Nature wanted us to do, or sorry, what Mother Nature would have done, and U.S. investors are involved, then all provisions of the trade agreements apply. That's a little rabbit hole. I'll try and not do that again. So, it's important to look that, this is not just conspiracy theory stuff. There's, in 2011, Chrétien said, we have to be able to debate these issues. We're selling oil, it's finite. We're selling gas, it's finite. Water, it's raining and snowing in Canada every year. Water is something that's not finite. In 2012, the Blackstone Group, several top investment bankers buying up and privatizing water around the world, said Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, UBS, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, Macquarie Bank, Barclays Bank, the Blackstone Group, Allianz, and HSBC, among others, are consolidating their control over water. In 2014, the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations Task Force calls for the North American community to address the diversion of water from one watershed to another because demands on limited water resources will grow. In 2015, the case for Canadian bulk water exports, the University of Calgary School of Public Policy, and this is important, so I'm going to read it, says the controversy over bulk water exports arises from a really narrow concept of water's role in the global market. There is water embedded in coal, oil, uranium, and food exports. Why should virtual water be treated differently from water sold in bulk to thirsty nations? Understanding the rationale will become increasingly important as drought-ravaged countries look to nations like Canada to augment dwindling water supplies. Canada has 20% of the planet's total fresh water supply. Of course, it all runs north. Achieving global water security may be advanced if water-rich nations like Canada find responsible and sustainable ways to export water. And the 2017 Frontier School for Public Policy estimated Manitoba could make $1.33 billion a year by exporting 1% of the water that flows into Hudson's Bay. That's the Grand Canal Project. So, people say, well, yeah, but this isn't like, there's too many mountains in the way. There's too much stuff you'd have to do. Well, it's interesting. There's something called closed loop pumped storage hydropower and open loop pumped storage hydropower. And in the United States, in order to generate electricity, you have a reservoir down here, you have a reservoir up on the top of the mountain, you pump the water up and then you drop it down. 96%, and in the dropping down through Penfolds talk, you get a hydro. 96% of utility scale US energy storage is based on pumped storage hydropower. I was really surprised when I learned that. An American currently has 43 PSH plants and the potential to double that capacity. So do you remember, you can't say yes or no, but remember playing snakes and ladders as a kid? Do you remember? So what you needed was a snake or a ladder to get from one square to another. It's the same with drainage basins. And these pumped storage hydropowers are just perfect to facilitate the interbasin diversions needed to bring water to markets. The next step, federal approval, is federal project of the Annex Dam. Development of water infrastructure south of the Annex Dam to support irrigation needs of Alberta farmers. And then completion of interbasin links to bring diverted outflows of Alaska water south through the Peace. Remember, it's the only east-west to bring it east of the Rockies, and then down through the Annex Dam, the elbow, into the United States. And the argument is going to be, it's American water anyway. This is a commodity. This is a good under NAFTA. We have the right to use the river systems as a highway. River systems are highways. We transport all sorts of things on them. We have the right to use the river system as a highway to transport Alaskan water diverted from ocean outflows south to American users. It's our water anyway, so out of the way. So how do we stop this? So there's a federal ban on bulk water exports. There's a provincial ban in BC on bulk water exports. Neither hold water, because when you get into these trade agreements, all the parties promise to go back and put into place all laws and regulations to give full force and effect to the agreements at the trade table. And so if you want to breach that on on something like typewriters, maybe no one's going to get too upset because nobody uses them anymore. On something like water, it's going to be a bit of a bigger issue. There's a lot of people, including prime ministers, pointing to side letters to NAFTA and CUSMA. Side letters are like little appendices, but they're called side letters. And that exempts water. Well, it doesn't exempt water. It affirms that water in its natural state is not subject to the agreement. And the CUSMA letter reads, the agreement between you creates no rights to the natural water of a party to the agreement, unless water in any form has entered into commerce and become a good or product. Remember, bottling, making snow, putting it in an irrigation ditch, holding back for whatever reason. Then unless it becomes good, it's not covered by the provisions of the agreement. But once it does, it is. Nothing in the agreement would oblige a party to exploit its water for commercial use, including its withdrawal, extraction, or diversion for export in bulk. No, because we believe that the market is the one who should tell us what to do. And so nothing in the agreement is going to pretend to tell people what to do about this. This will be the markets that undertake this initiative for sure. We're getting close. So we have 3 arrows in Canada's quiver, I think. Policy, infrastructure, and trade. And these next little slides, I used AI to generate, and it was sort of fun. I might, at the end, show you AI hallucinates, and I found some quite funny hallucinations. Anyway, so policy, we need to protect watersheds and drainage basins. Interbasin transfers reduce the sovereignty of communities over their watersheds, and they risk the spread of parasites and disease that harm ecology. So we need to protect watersheds and drainage basins without the integrity of them, without interbasin transfers. And there may be speakers who disagree with me on that, but I feel that. Infrastructure. So we need to facilitate. This slide initially was more harsh, and then I tried to back it off and make it more considered. We need to facilitate transparent and engaged public discussion of the link between the Amisk Dam and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers water diversion plans. People need to understand this. We need to include an examination of the risk of facilitating continental diversions in the federal environmental impact assessment process for all dams across Canada. And we need to mandate public approval as a condition to proceed with the Amisk Dam. And on the trade level, we need to demand an explicit exemption for water from the goods, services, and investment provisions of the agreement. Now, CUSMA and NAFTA got a bit better than FTA on some of the investment provisions, but there's still serious, serious problems, and we need to pull water right out of that. Schindler, in my book, said Site C is just the beginning. And in Canada's mid-century long-term strategy, to comply with our COP21 commitments, we need to reduce emissions. This would require the equivalent of over 100 Site C dams in the next 35 years. Now, there might not be 100 dams. There might be some that are much larger, but the equivalent of over 100 in the next 35 years. And the Peace, Slave, Athabasca, Nelson, and Churchill rivers are explicitly mentioned in the mid-century long-term strategy for Canada's report. Think about that. Think about snakes and ladders. Remember that image? Jeffrey Sachs, little Jeffrey Sachs, said, guys, you have so much water up there in Canada. We just need you to create a whole bunch of reservoirs and store all that excess flow in these reservoirs and then sell us the electricity. And guess what? When you have all these reservoirs here down the road, oh, gee, we never thought about it before, but this would be a really good idea to be able to bring the water down too. You have to recognize that nothing in the trade agreements requires anyone to export water. The trigger will be the market, forecast to be worth a cool $431 billion US in 2030. You have to recognize that Canada can say no. Our domestic laws trump, I love that, trump US rights under the trade agreements, but denying American trade rights over water will invite, I suggest, some very heavy penalties. Get this thing out of the way. You have to recognize that continental water sharing is a 100-year plan. With pieces moving so slowly, they go unrecognized. They go unrecognized. We're used to looking at short to medium term. Politicians look at 4 years. Short to medium term, 20 years is about as far out as we look. We're not looking far enough in understanding what's happening here. We need to connect the dots. We need to recognize that each link in the chain will be sold based on legitimate short to medium term public policy benefits: power generation, irrigation, flood control, COP21. You know, it's gonna, just as Site C was, right? And we need to recognize that global water firms whispering into the ears of politicians, and SNC Lavalin was Clark's primary advisor on Site C, are not peddling dreams of continental water diversions. No, they're peddling dreams of jobs, renewable energy, agriculture, COP21, and flood control. And these are the drivers. We need to recognize that the only sustainable option for America is water conservation. It's totally doable. Water conservation, not continental water diversion. As Mark Twain allegedly said, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting about. Look at this map. Look at all the lines. It's time to stand up, Canada, and protect our watersheds and protect our communities. Thank you very much. I totally lost track of my time, so I don't know if I'm in or out of time, but.
You're perfectly on time. I was going to give you one more minute, Wendy. Anyhow,
Oh, good.
You know, they say that there aren't any questions when the presentation has gotten the point across very well to me, and I learned a lot here as well, Wendy. But I thought the uphill, destroying the uphill argument, that was an interesting point. But I've read most of your book. By the way, for the listeners out there, this book is Damming the Peace is in the public library. It's fairly commonly found, and so read it. And the recording, somebody asked about the recording.
Yeah, okay.
It will be on the council website, according to Eagle, next week. So that's where you can find the recording on the same name. Anyhow, unless I don't see any questions there in the Q&A, Wendy, but
that's fine. Maybe at the end there'll be some.
Yes, people have to. I
Oh,
guess.
I would just say that the IJC is not helpful at all here, because the IJC looks at water situate along the boundary, not water crossing the boundary. So it's not helpful either to help us to protect water. But
Right.
I'll be around. I would wait to the end. So if there's no questions, that's fine.
All right, fabulous, Wendy. Thank you very much. And I'm going to move on to, I don't know, I think Tricia, Alan was going to be a bit later. Are you going to go next, Tricia, then?
Oh, there's
Or-
one question in the Q&A box here, if you want me to read it out to you. Should the Canadian federal government constitutionally override provincial authority to impose strong national water regulations and sustainable water resource development and protection in national interests as it has acted to dismantle interprovincial trade barriers? So
Absolutely.
my question is apolitical.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 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 It's just too easy to get diverted in this argument by all the money involved in it. And, yeah, I think absolutely. Did I answer your question?
I think
I did.
I think the question was answered well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure why oh, there it is there. Okay, well, maybe more on that at the end. And Wendy has graciously offered to stick around here, although she's an hour earlier than us, so she can stay up. Anyhow, I guess our next speaker was Martin. Sorry, it was Alan. Did you decide whether you'll be able to stick it out
I
to
can go anytime.
There's Martin. I think Martin is there, but we're going to have to cut Martin's presentation pretty short here because of the time. But Martin, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I can go very quickly.
We're a little behind schedule here, but or we'll just have to carry the main presentations into the last half hour. But how much time do you think you'll need, Martin?
I can do this in 8 minutes.
Okay, well,
All
no
right.
hurry, but
Let's just jump in. I'll just go ahead and jump
that's
right
it.
in.
Sure. Go. Martin's going to talk about law,
Sure,
I
folks.
believe.
So my name is Martin Olshinsky. I'm a prof at the University of Calgary Faculty of Law. And I just wanted, I think in my very quick presentation, I'll just kind of try to give everybody a bit of a sense of who does what between the federal and provincial governments in this space, and what are some opportunities currently for providing some feedback. And so as just my overview slide here, I'll talk a bit about the nature of federal jurisdiction and provincial jurisdiction, and then a bit about the Water Act, and maybe say a few words about international law. So hopefully, I suspect in terms of people who are joining us, maybe you've all somewhat familiar with the Constitution. I always encourage people to go to that document. It is an important one. A flawed document for sure, but still the basic blueprint for governance in our country. And so when you go there, there are two primary sections that set out jurisdiction in terms of like the power to make laws. There's Section 91, which gives the federal government, lists a whole series of things that the federal government can make laws about. And then there's Section 92. And so, and that's for the provinces. So in terms of Section 91, on the list, I've kind of provided here just a quick snapshot of all the areas, all the sort of what we call classes of subjects. We also call these heads of power that are relevant to water. And in Canada, in particular, at the federal level, really, when we think about federal water law currently, we think about quality. The federal government isn't in the business of allocating water. It's not in the business of granting licenses for taking water. That's the provinces. So provinces have jurisdiction over quantity, but really the federal government has become the kind of de facto water quality regulator. And one of the main sort of like sources of that jurisdiction is its jurisdiction over seacoast and inland fisheries. And so that's a jurisdiction that we've had since 1867, right at the beginning in the Constitution. And that really gives rise, that's the basis for the Federal Fisheries Act, which is really the primary water quality law at the national level in Canada. And so some of you may be familiar with it. There's a prohibition against harmful alteration and disruption of and destruction of fish habitat, also referred to as HAD for people who are in the industry. If you work in mining, forestry, whatever, then you know the prohibition against HAD. Farmers know the prohibition against HAD because sometimes it applies to their water, to their ditches and such. We also have a prohibition against deleterious substances in Section 36 of the Fisheries Act, and that is essentially the de facto water quality regulation in Canada. And so lots of different regulations allowing certain kinds of effluent, but prohibiting other forms of deleterious substances. There are lots of heads of power here. Navigation and shipping. There was a reference to navigation, absolutely. Rivers and streams and lakes are public highways, and so jurisdiction there has impacts for flows and for water quality. There's a residual power called the POG power, peace, order, and good government. And that is the basis for federal jurisdiction over what we call transboundary waters. So all waters, rivers that pass from one province to another, to the extent that there can be issues in terms of quantity and quality, as between those provinces or territories, that falls on the federal government, and that's as a result of this POG power. There's also this power to enter into treaties with other countries, and that gets very complicated quickly, but there's this like sort of prior power called the imperial treaty power, and that was signed between Britain and the United States with respect to boundary waters. So the previous speaker, when he referred to boundary waters and the IJC, the basis for that is the imperial treaty power and the treaty that we signed with the United States in 1909. So it's worth pointing out, and I think the point's been made. I mean, Canada's a water nation, right? We have rivers and covering the whole area and flowing in various directions, and always ignoring political realities, of course, and political boundaries. And so in that context, when we think about like every water body that has fish and fish habitat is subject to some kind of federal jurisdiction. Every water body that is navigable is subject to some kind of federal jurisdiction. Every water body that transverses a provincial boundary is subject to some kind of federal jurisdiction. You start to see that when you pile all that together, as much as the provinces would like very much to be captains of their own ship entirely and do this in a unilateral way, there is a clear, strong hook for federal involvement. And so it's not surprising to many of us that we now have, based in Manitoba, a Canada Water Agency. And so this is a new agency that really has only taken, that's been established in the last couple of years. and it'll be interesting to watch how it sort of fulfills its mandate, recognizing that the provinces very strongly jealously guard their jurisdiction in this space. So Section 92 of the Constitution now looking at provincial powers, lots of hooks for provincial, jurisdiction over water. Probably the most significant one is just actually, frankly, the reality of ownership, right? The provinces are the owners of their lands and resources, and as a result of that, are also the owners of the water, sorry. And that's set out very explicitly in the Water Act and in predecessor legislation, the Water Resources Act, and before that, the Northwest Irrigation Act. That was a federal piece of legislation. The Crown has, since 1894 in Western Canada, essentially asserted ownership of all water. And so that then is really the basis, that is the primary basis, that we can use all these other hooks, local private matters, local works and undertakings, property and civil rights, but that really is the fundamental basis for provincial regulation of water, and in particular of taking water, right? Using water, diverting water, using it for various purposes. And so in our Water Act in Alberta, we have a section on water planning that's been not very much used. It's been really only used on the South Saskatchewan River Basin. But there is this power to enter into planning. But really if you think about the beating heart and the main event of the Water Act, it's the licensing regime. This is sections 49 to 61. So if I am a farmer, if I am a rancher, if I am a food processing plant, if I want to use water, I have to get a license from the province to do so. It's a fit-for system, what we refer to as fit-for, so first in time, first in right. And for those of us who live in South Saskatchewan or in the Southern Saskatchewan River Basin in Southern Alberta, we know that the basin's been allocated for over 100 years, and it is in fact over-allocated. And so in fact, in the South Saskatchewan River Basin, and that's the map there on the right, you can no longer get a new license. The basin is closed. And what you need to do then in that context is there are different ways. The primary sort of ways envisioned by the Water Act is that you can either seek an assignment, the kind of temporary assignment of water from another water rights holder, or you can seek to have a transfer. And so that in that context, we're referring to the South Saskatchewan River Basin having a water market. So people can approach people who have licenses and they can offer them money, and then they can together file an application for a transfer of a water license or a portion of that water license. What they can't do currently is that you cannot get a license to transfer water between basins. So this was already mentioned as well. So there's a prohibition in Section 47 against interbasin transfers within the province. And that is preceded at Section 46 with a prohibition against interbasin transfers outside of the province, so for export. It's not an absolute prohibition. It's subject if the legislature can pass a special act of the legislature to authorize those kind of basin transfers. And that has been done. It's been done in the last, I want to say 15 years, less than a dozen times. Almost in every case, it's being done as a water quality measure. Some community doesn't have access. Sometimes it's a First Nation community, doesn't have access to clean water, and therefore an interbasin transfer is proposed to sort of, and done to essentially alleviate that problem. But it does require, under the current legislation, a special act of the legislature. I don't think I was going to talk about this, but I think, fundamentally, I think my perspective on international law is, so first of all, I think we can take the position that all law essentially is downstream of politics, but I think international law in particular. And so, when we're thinking about international trade agreements, they obviously don't seem to be worth the paper that they're written on currently when we think about the way that the United States is acting, for instance, in the Trump administration. We have these mechanisms, we have international law. We will continue to insist, I think, as other nations will, on the rule of law, including international law. But that is frankly just essentially like a big question mark to the extent to which the Trump administration is prepared to sort of bend those rules. So I don't know that there's a ton that I can say to that. I think what I do want to close with quickly is just that there are currently opportunities for engagement. If you are interested in the Provincial Water Act, the government of Alberta is currently considering several changes, including making interbasin transfers easier. So they are floating that idea. They want to, for what they call low risk interbasin transfers, they would like to not have to pass a special act of the legislature, but instead have some kind of bureaucratic sort of essentially mechanism. And that's discussed in the context of water quality. It's also discussed in the context of facilitating oil and gas production. So that might be something that folks here are interested in thinking about. And then the Canada Water Act. I mentioned earlier the Canada Water Agency. One of the things that they decide to do is one of the first things they want to do is consider reviewing the Canada Water Act. So the Canada Water Act has been around for about 40 years, but it's actually not really used at all. As a person who practices water law, teaches water law, like the Canada Water Act is essentially a non-entity, really, when it comes to sort of like practical implications on the ground. And so they are considering why that's the case. And generally that's the case because it's always been very jurisdictionally timid. The federal government's always been weary and wary of annoying the provinces, frankly, by getting too involved in water regulation. So it is interesting that the federal government is choosing to review that act now, and they're at a pre-engagement stage. So those are the links there, and that's my presentation for you today.
Well, thanks for making it out in the end, Martin, and we really do appreciate it. And just a couple of comments. Looks like people are staying with us, so you guys are doing a great job. If you can stick around for a couple more minutes, I don't know if there's any questions here on the Q&A for you.
Yeah, we got 3 nice long questions, 4 or 5. Quite a few questions here.
We won't be able to cover all of them. So I just want to make one little comment here, and I think it's great that you sort of tied into what Wendy said. People always looking to. I mean, this is the purpose of this webinar, is to get people involved. Interbasin transfers, and you've mentioned that, and Wendy at the end of her presentation talked about that as well. So that's great. But let me just pick a couple of these questions here, Eagle, because there's just they're very long, and we only have a few more minutes to do that.
Sure.
We still need to put Tricia and Alan on.
Yeah. So you know what? Why don't we just roll through to the next presentation, because I know we're already a little bit behind. So why don't we just let Tricia get ahead, and we'll see about after the fact.
Would you be able to stick around till 9, Martin?
Probably not, to be honest. But I just think it's the nature of the beast. These are huge questions too. I can see them actually in the side here, and absolutely Indigenous rights are important, and absolutely all those things have to be touched on.
Agree with you totally, Martin. I agree with you totally.
Yeah, let's just keep rolling. Yeah.
Let's move on.
All right, Martin, thanks so much for making it out in the midst of your event. All right. Boy, I bet people need to take a breather out there, myself, sure. And I've studied this quite a bit myself, but I'm still learning lots here. So anyways, I think we have to be flexible here. And rather than trying to hurry you along, Tricia and Alan, maybe just do what you're going to do, and we'll just carry it into the last half hour as, presentations. And yeah, by the way, I'm looking for in this webinar, being with the Council of Canadians, being an educator by profession, what can people do? And, both Martin and Wendy have mentioned things, and how can we get involved? Well, most people aren't going to do their PhDs like you guys have, but they could do something anyways as public members. All right, I'm just going to introduce Dr. Tricia Stadnik, who's from the University of Calgary, and she can say she has a long list of accomplishments and is often quoted in the media, I notice, and has lately called I read the article there myself, the water markets and licenses a Wild West. So I don't know if you remember saying that, Tricia, but
yeah,
you had something to say about that, and I'll let you just go ahead, introduce yourself however you want. People have seen what you're going to talk about on the registrations. Thanks very much for coming.
Oh yeah, sure, no problem. Thank you very much for having me. And this is a fascinating webinar. I've been taking notes as well, but I think most people know me. And if you don't, you can look me up. My name's on the screen there, so that's fine. Yeah, all of these issues are fascinating. And I think what I really wanted to get across, and I'm going to shorten my presentation too, just for the sake of time, is that there's several factors right now that are leading to increasing threats to Canadian water security. And namely, it's the intersection of several things. And Wendy started us off in a great way by introducing the fact that, you know, there's a difference between long-term planning and short-term planning, and our governments just simply aren't set up to deal with the kind of long-term planning that goes along with these threats. So the first one is the decreasing supply, and that's, you know, largely due to climate change, and that's intersecting with rapidly increasing demand. We know that particularly here in Alberta, we've had a massive population growth and boom, and you know, everyone needs water. That economy needs water too. So there's a competition for the finite resources. And then this is overlaying on the historical inequities and licensing issues and law issues that Martin did an excellent job of laying out. And then new to this, or maybe not new, as Wendy would argue, but unfortunately heating up right now is the intersection of all of this with geopolitical threats that are, you know, leading to a lot of increased tension right now. So without further ado, I'll launch in here. I had planned to give a really brief overview of the basins. Wendy did a great job of showing us some maps. Martin showed us a map of Canada with all of its rivers and lakes. But I think it's really important to understand a couple of things. First of all, in Western Canada, there's actually only 3 massive continental drainage systems that are responsible for our water. The Columbia, the Mackenzie, which the Peace River is part of, and then the Saskatchewan Nelson Churchill. Depending on where you are, the river has different names. Ultimately, to me, it's all part of the Nelson system. And that's basically what takes water from the border between BC and Alberta all the way out to Hudson Bay. And so these 3 systems are part of the Pacific and the Arctic drainage systems, as well as the Hudson Bay watershed. There's a very small part of southern Alberta that's part of a transboundary water basin that's actually part of the Mississippi, and that's the Milk St. Mary system, and that's a transboundary basin with the US. But what's really unique about our area is all 3 of these massive continental systems originate at a hydrological apex known as the snow dome. Many of you will know it as the Columbia Ice Fields or the Athabasca Glacier. Many people have been there. All of those basins are fed at that headwater, and that's an incredibly important headwater. So when things change with the glacier, unfortunately, it has an impact on all of these basins and their water supply. And that's really what we're seeing in rapid cycling right now. And then coupled with decreasing snowpacks, and that snow acts largely to help support the glacier by bouncing the radiation and the light off of it. The darker that glacier gets, the faster it melts. And that's where the wildfires are having a really increased impact, because all of that ash that gets kicked up in the air gets deposited on top of that glacier and melts it much faster than projected. So our estimates used to be 2050 for the Bow River, the headwater of the Bow River and the Bow Glacier. And now the Bow and the Peyto are actually expected to be gone altogether by as early as 2035. And so that's kind of a scary place to be. So what have we been seeing? Well, widespread drought. Unfortunately, we're just not getting the same kind of snowpack. And Wendy and Richard had some wonderful statistics on all of this. The one thing I'm gonna call Richard out on is I'm gonna say that actually in the science literature now, there is consensus about some of these hotspots, and Alberta is one of them. There is consensus in the models, the most recent round of models, CMIP 6 is what we call them, that things are not only getting hotter, significantly hotter, but also that precipitation isn't changing. So that's the interesting part, because when you intersect those two, things get hotter, not necessarily wetter. We're losing a lot more water to the atmosphere, which means the lake levels and the wetlands and the rivers are drying up. And this is particularly true when we don't get snowpacks, which of course the image I'm showing here is from 2024. Many of us in Western Canada will remember that last year was quite dry. Water levels were below the what we call quartile of the record, which is the lowest 25% of all the years of record that we have, which in the mountains sometimes is on upwards of 80 years, believe it or not. But what was unique about 2024 is how widespread this drought was. Like, it didn't just cover one province or half a province. It covered, and this is from the North American Drought Monitor, it really covered most of Canada, particularly Western Canada. And that was really the first time that I kind of went, huh, this is bad. This is bad for a number of reasons. And of course, what we saw at the end of 2024 is the top right figure here, which is that globally we shattered a new record. Unfortunately, it was the first time that globally we reached temperatures, long-term averages above 1.5 degrees Celsius warming on average over the entire year. Unfortunately, what you need to know is that Canada is warming at 2 to 3 times that rate on average, and the Canadian Arctic is actually warming at 4 to 8 times that rate. So we are literally the canary in the coal mine, and the world is looking to us to see how our water cycle is changing in terms of supply to better understand how they're going to manage and mitigate climate change. All right, Martin alluded to this really nicely, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I just wanted to point out that many of our basins, particularly the most populated ones, are over allocated in terms of water supply. Very simply, this means that the governments have given out more water licenses than there exists water within the basin. So the question is, how does this happen? Well, first of all, at the time that water licenses were being given out, late 1800s, we didn't know much about the water cycle. We've learned a whole bunch since then. Number two, industry has exploded, and of course there is a need for water, and so those licenses were given out by individual provinces, not necessarily looking at the whole basin picture or the long-term picture of how things were changing, which is what Wendy mentioned. And one of the most severe areas is what I'm showing here, Saskatchewan River Basin. It's the only jurisdiction in Canada that's been closed to new licenses since 2005. And that's pretty significant. So you cannot get a water license if you're within one of those South Saskatchewan river basins. All right, so historically, when demand outpaces supply so significantly, our solution has been to change that curve. That's how we do it. We engineer our way out of it. And what I'm showing here is the Palliser Triangle, the area in yellow. It is the driest region of Canada, and it was historically thought when it was first explored by John Palliser and his crew to be useless desert. And that's a quote from the Palliser papers. Today, this is one of the most viable agriculture regions in all of Canada. It's more than 80% of Canada's irrigation-based agriculture, and it's worth more than 22 billion annually to the Canadian GDP. So very, very important. The question is, how did the driest region of Canada become the most productive agriculturally? And that's literally because we engineered our way out of it. We developed irrigation, and we took water and we put it on the land in places that it didn't exist. So the legacy of this has been historic control of our rivers. Control exists in two forms. This is fragmentation, which is disrupting the natural flow of a watercourse, and regulation, which is control of the outflow. So some disruptions don't control outflow. Think of a culvert that goes under a bridge. It doesn't necessarily control the outflow. It just squeezes the water into a smaller area. And so that's fragmentation. What I'm showing here is from a picture of a paper from 2015 that mapped globally the degree of regulation and fragmentation. And of course, the red colors are the worst because that is not only high regulation, severe, but also very high fragmentation. And not a surprise, Western Canada lights up like a cherry here, and particularly, the kind of central North America. And that's where we see the most heavy amount of not only regulation, but fragmentation. And this just really has massive consequences for our water system. So my research has spent quite a bit of time looking at this impact. What I'm showing here is a series of hydrographs that have been compared in paired watershed studies. They originate in the same geographical region within the same larger watershed, but one river is regulated, one river is unregulated. You can see the contrast of that by the different colors. So two key trends that I want to point out. If we compare the green line to the blue line, so the green line is one of these up here. These two are very similar, but the green one to this blue one, you'll see the impact of regulation. What regulation essentially does is it flattens everything. And the reason is uniform delivery is the best way to supply energy. So if you think about hydropower, they want a constant flow of energy. They don't want this peaking at certain times of the year. So what do? They throw in a storage and they wipe out the low flows and they wipe out the high flows and they average everything out. The second thing is that you get this jagged trend, and that's because we've preserved day of the week. It's just a statistical averaging technique. That's what's known as hydropeaking. So depending on the day of the week, you get ups and downs that happen. This is not part of the natural system. The natural system you'll see represented in the red and the green lines, which is before the major hydroelectric operations were built. And you see this not only beautiful seasonal pattern that adds a flush to the ecosystem. It's like drinking water for your kidneys, flushes your system out. See these nice low flows, and then you see these high peak flows. That's what the ecosystem depends on for water quality, for base flow, as well as for regulating temperature. And that kind of gets destroyed when we regulate systems. All right, so Martin covered this as well as Wendy a little bit, but I just want to point out that there's three main transboundary water agreements that exist for Alberta and Western Canada. First is the international one, regulated by the IJC. This is where water, as Wendy very rightly pointed out, exists in 13 river basins spanning the Canada-US border. And in Alberta, we share water with Montana in this Milk St. Mary's system. Then we also have another transboundary water agreement that extends for the South Saskatchewan River Basin and any river that crosses provincial boundaries. So this is regulated by the Prairie Province's Water Board, and it's a 1969 agreement called the Master Agreement on Apportionment. And it essentially says that 50% of the water in any province is theirs. The other 50% must be passed downstream. And that's essentially to make sure that Manitoba gets water. Manitoba might argue they get too much water these days, but that's essentially why the agreement was developed. And then the third agreement is for the Mackenzie Basin going from south to north, which basically says that Alberta has a responsibility to make sure that the quantity and quality, in this case of the water, is preserved within the Mackenzie system. And in large part, this was created, this is the newest one. It was negotiated by and for First Nations, which is amazing, but it was actually created because of concerns out of the oil sands and what that was doing at the headwaters in the Mackenzie to the downstream water. Okay, so the Wild West of water. Well, Western Canada water rights are really antiquated and archaic. We are one of the only remaining jurisdictions in Western North America that still goes by priority-based allocation. First in time, first in right. Martin mentioned that. I'm going to break this down for you very simply. Essentially, what it means is that the first people to get a water license back in the late 1800s, which were not Indigenous people, they were not allowed to hold water licenses. These are things like large organizations, the churches, the farmers, those kinds of people, oil and gas industry. They have full rights to withdraw their entire license before anyone else gets any share of the water. There are no ecosystem rights. There are no First Nations provisions for any of that water by basin and by water license in Alberta. That's a bit of a problem, and we've seen this kind of system fail in many examples around the world. Okay, last but not least, rising geopolitical tensions. So, my colleagues have done a great job here introducing some of the rhetoric from Trump. I'm not going to reiterate that, but essentially I laid out in a series of 2 different papers. Ultimately, this comes down to 3 key issues. Security, making sure that the US has security as the Arctic opens up. They want a larger share of water and energy resources. They also want to be able to generate more hydropower and be in control of that and the costing of that. And then economic security, ultimately paying less for having more. And that has put a lot of pressure on Canada and will continue to do so, as Wendy pointed out, because the whole issue of water as a commodity has not been addressed or settled yet legally. So what can we do, though? I know Richard really wants us to talk about this. So first of all, we ultimately need a federal water policy framework and mandate. We can't handle this by individual provinces alone, and we can't have this kind of short-term thinking. We must adapt our thinking to be transformative, long-term, risk-based design practice. If we're going to implement dams, we need to think this through on a 500-year timescale or a 1,000-year timescale, not a short timescale. We definitely need to invest economically and show that we have economic wealth to offer. But we need to really move from rhetoric to reality on this. We have resources the world wants and actually depends on. But approaching this from a long-term resilient planning is absolutely necessary if we're also going to protect the viability of those resources. And importantly, I think our government really needs to deliver strong counter narratives. This is not something we can do on an individual basis. And we as people need to put pressure on our government to step up to the plate here, perhaps as a role for the Canada Water Agency, but this is something we need to keep on the politicians' radar. And I'll leave you with one last thought. I met with the new president of the Canada Water Agency just last week. And he, I had a conversation with him and I said, honestly, as long as we're thinking about this as water, there's not going to be any action. We need to think about this as economics, and we need to think about this as urgent matters of trade and tariffs, something that's really going to hit people where it counts. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tricia. And I can't express my gratitude in words for your coming out in your evening. And maybe you're an Oilers fan. I don't know. Although you are from Calgary, I'm not expecting it. But anyhow, yeah, there are two questions here, and I think we have time if Alan's willing to stay up a little longer. But it's going to be about the same end time here. We have two questions, and would speaking to watershed security rather than water security allow for it to be protected in its natural state? I guess you can see those questions on your Q&A, but would you want me to read it again? Would speaking to water...
No, I've got it. Yeah, it's all good. This is something that Wendy can feel free to chime into, but honestly, my first take is no, because honestly, as long as we're talking about it as water security or insecurity, no one's going to pay attention. There's a long legacy of people ignoring environmental consequences and change, including climate change. And we just don't simply react to that because it's too long term, too big picture for us to think about. We need to think about it as economic insecurity or trade and tariffs. And as soon as we feel that threat, Canadians have shown that they're willing to step up to the plate and react. But I'll let Wendy chime in. You're muted, Wendy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have a dog here who was completely acting up on that. So which question were you responding to? The first one? Would watershed security rather than water security allow it to be protected? Was the question you were responding to?
Yes, that was the one.
So and this came up in the chat before. I think there's tremendous studies to suggest the dangers of interbasin transfers and the importance of the integrity of drainage basins. To the same extent that the federal government is off in Ottawa and the provincial government is down at the toe of that island off the coast of British Columbia, and the regional governments and the local governments are the ones that's easiest to impact. I think that we can get connection to our local watersheds as a passion point for communities. And if we can do that, and we can, what have you done today to look after your local watershed? And I think that there's a lot of potential for mobilization of all of the things that the public has to embrace in order to deal with this huge problem. And I think I just believe the watershed model is, it's like that local government. We can have voices can be heard at that watershed level.
Yeah, and I'm a huge advocate of the grassroots movement because I think these watershed councils and the farmers and the people living on the land, the Indigenous people, our First Nations, they understand it so much better. But we need to put some pressure on the politicians for sure.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Maybe we'll let Alan get on pretty quickly here, and maybe leave these questions, but we still have them. I think.
Can I just put a codicil to the last thing I just said, just really quickly? When I said that I agreed with the fact that the federal government should have more say, that really depends on how enlightened the federal government is. And if you look at we have Union of BC municipalities, I'm sure each province has a council of municipalities that comes together at the end each year and talks about where government has to move. I really also think that some kind of model where we have input from the municipalities and the regional districts and the watersheds together with some overarching federal regulation is really what we should be looking for.
Right. Could I just ask Eagle? Eagle, are you still there? Hello, calling Eagle. He may have bowed out
Yes,
for a
I
minute.
am. No, I'm here.
Yeah, well, will these questions still be available after Alan is finished?
Yes. Yeah, the questions remain in there until either answered or dismissed.
Okay, well, maybe, yeah, there's lots of questions anyways. That's a good thing. Alan, maybe you could just move forward, and Alan's the only person I've met in face-to-face, had a coffee with him, and do very much appreciate you showing up at this late hour, Alan, and missing the game as well on top of it. But go ahead, Dr. Alan Good. He's going to talk mostly about irrigation, I understand.
Are you sharing this screen of mine? I don't see it coming up.
Yes, we can see your screen, Alan.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. The Oilers are down 3-2, by the way.
You need to put it into presentation mode, Alan.
How do I do that?
You reached out on the bottom of your of the thing. There's a little thing that looks like a TV screen, and it looks like a little TV screen, and you just click on that. It's next to the slide bar on the sizing. It's on the lower right-hand corner. If you click on that little thing that looks like a little TV screen or a little square on top of a pedestal, that'll give you your slides. Not that one. Go over two more. Go over one more and then go over one more.
Show media.
You see there's four little squares, and then there's something that looks like 2 pages of a book, and then right next to it there's something that looks like a little TV screen.
Do not see it.
On the bottom, the very bottom of your PowerPoint.
All right.
window.
Okay.
That's it. That's it. Click on that. There you go.
Oh. All right. My apologies, everybody. I want to go back. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you. I have not formally worked on water in the sense I'm actually a plant geneticist, but I have a number of colleagues and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. So I guess I'm similar to Richard. Anyway, backing up and giving us some history. If you go back, of course, the indigenous people understood the areas that were difficult to live in. And of course, they had a different lifestyle, but it was really John Palliser who came along and defined what became known as Palliser's Triangle, which is shown here in this map. And he basically said this area in red and to some degree in orange was not an area where you try and attempt agriculture. And of course, as things went forward, we thought, well, we can perhaps change that. And so William Pierce came along and introduced the Northwest Irrigation Act. And fast forward a number of years, and we now have a large number of irrigation districts, which are shown here. Some of these have recently merged, but the predominant ones, of course, are the ones that are actually serviced by the Bow, the Western, Eastern, and Bow River irrigation districts. So these are all irrigation districts that were set up as a result of the Northwest Irrigation Act. And this act did some very interesting things. if you were to come along as a private landowner and have someone say, well, we're going to take your land from you and we're going to vest it in the government, you would have had tremendous opposition. But what they did, recognizing the problems that came out of the US, is they vested in the federal government the ownership of all the water, and therefore the government had the right to issue licenses. So it now became a public resource. And the way in which it was managed, which has been mentioned by a number of my colleagues, was using this process called FITFER, first in time, first in right. The US uses a slightly different system called a priority-based system, but it's largely, the distinction can be viewed as between one where individuals register a right versus the government owning the right, and you then have to request from the government the right to utilize this resource. And you have to utilize the resource in a way that is beneficial to society. And of course, at that time, keeping a fish alive was generally not judged as being beneficial to society. Now, it was a bit of a challenge, I have to admit, to integrate with my colleagues, but I hope to the best I could, I tried to integrate these. And I tried to focus on a couple of key issues. So we have here FITFER. And so we have a legal system for designating who has rights to water. And the system basically works, which is if I have rights and my rights have a priority date earlier than yours, and I get 100% of my water, and then you come after. So this was the system in place. And back in around 2000, this was after the Old Man River Dam was in place. They realized that they were going into a drought period. And I have several colleagues who sat on this committee. And one of the issues was the fact that the province had actually made a commitment to the First Nations, the Piikani. But the Piikani, because they were First Nations, had actually been issued a very junior license, which meant that they would be cut off from water much earlier than anybody else. And this was felt by the committee as being perhaps not in the spirit of what was intended. So the question was, how do you resolve this issue? And the key was a legal decision, which is rarely discussed. There's only one paper where I've ever seen it discussed, where they basically said, well, you know, if there's a lot of water flowing down the river, if we take it aside and we put it into a reservoir, then it no longer sort of falls into this issue of licensing. It becomes provincial water. So we can now designate it as we see fit. And I have probed several people who are involved in this controversy to try and find out legally how this decision was made. It's a bit challenging to find out how it occurred, but it turned out to be a very important decision. Anyway, at that point in time, the gentleman who was running the water licenses, a guy by the name of Dave McGee, the water master, I think it's a great title, he recognized the issues that were coming down the pipe. And what he did was he pulled everybody together and he said, okay, let's have a conversation about how this is all going to spin out, okay? We have this legal agreement, FITFER, first in time, first in right. Therefore, a junior license should be cut off before a senior license. Well, it turned out that a number of things. One was the case of a lot of potato farmers who owned fairly senior licenses, But to process potatoes, you need a lot of water, and Lamb Wesson's French fry plant, because it was very recent, had quite a junior license. So it was pointed out to the potato farmers, well, yes, you will be given water to grow your potatoes. You just won't have a place to process them because Lamb Wesson is going to be cut off very quickly. There was even a case relayed to me by, I won't refer to whom, of a farmer going home and say, sweetie, I've got my license to grow my crop. It's just you won't have any water to wash your clothes or, have a bath or a shower or anything like that because the municipal license is junior to ours and it's going to be cut off. So what became clear as a result of this discussion was compromise was required. And as far as I'm aware, and I've discussed this with Dave McGee, who's now retired, but a number of other people, to this day, although you have a legal system of FITFER, there is a recognition that you have to approach this problem pragmatically. And, you may well have people who can have a license to grow a crop, but it doesn't make a lot of sense if you can't sell the crop. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you may have laws that you think are in place, but in reality, what's being dealt with on a practical level may be quite different. And so to some degree, we need to think about that. We need to not focus necessarily on the law, but focus on what pragmatically works for people. So the second issue I wanted to discuss is the extent to which we're going to see serious droughts, okay? And this is all work done by a colleague of mine, Dave Sachin, out of the University of Regina. And the way you do this from a practical perspective is you get these old trees and you take them and you count tree rings. And so you can develop over time basically a map of what happened historically in terms of drought, because trees don't grow in dry years. And if you look at it and you look at the figure I've shown here, what it tells you is that there have been periods of drought that have lasted much longer than anything we've dealt with. And so these three panels basically break it down under shorter time periods, because if you look over a period of 1,000 years, you get huge droughts. But here, this one in 1500 doesn't really even kind of show up. And then, of course, you move to more recently. So the reality of the situation may well be that the kind of droughts we're talking about of 2 to 3 years are really an anomaly. We may see droughts in the 4, 5, 10-year kind of period. And these are the kind of things governments have not thought about. So going back to the points that Wendy and Tricia raised, which is everybody thinks in a very short time frame. They do not understand the concepts of long-term issues. And so here's a group that's quite interesting. Water Smart. Water Smart seems to be a small private company based in Calgary that, as far as I can tell, and I know many of the people involved in it, and they're all well-intentioned, good people, but they seem to be basically filling the government's role of doing the modeling for them. And one of the interesting things that I found was they released a report just last year. This was the first report where they actually looked at the question of what happens if there's no water coming from glacial flow. Suppose the glaciers have disappeared. So if this, in this middle panel, you can see the contribution of glacial melt to this is the Pipestone River, but they were basically dealing with the bow here. And of course, it depends on where in the river you are. But the point I'm trying to make is that finally, we have groups who are modeling, who are looking at reality, which is that these glaciers are going to be gone in 20 to 30 years. Now, despite that, if that same report outlines a number of new dams that need to be built and the storage capacity of them, so there's going to be a new dam built which will service the East Central Irrigation Project. I've driven through there a number of times. I have to admit it's not clear to me how you grow crops in that neck of the woods. But a number of the other reservoirs are going to be expanded. So the interesting question from my perspective is, are you building reservoir capacity to store water that will never exist? Because you're looking at $3 to $5 billion. And as we always used to say at the U of A, when you got a report from the university on the cost of a building, it's going to cost you, it's going to take twice the time and cost 3 times the amount of money from everything they've given you. And as far as I could tell, I've never seen a building built at the U of A that didn't come in at least double the budget that they originally prospected. So if you look at all these cost benefit analysis and then just multiply the numbers by 2, they come out very differently. Okay, I'm going to finish with sort of one final story, very much a non-Canadian story, but a very interesting one. And the reason I raise it is because I think it raises a number of very interesting points when you deal with environmental challenges. Plus, it's a wonderful story. So Mineral King is a small valley in Central California that was done where hiking was done, and was largely undeveloped until the late 50s, early 60s. And if you look back at that time, skiing started to take off. And so several players got involved. And the point I want to try and make in this is that the rules changed constantly as things went forward. So the proponents of this were the U.S. Forest Service, whose mandate is to promote the use of their land. So they looked at development. The Park Service has a very different mandate, that is to protect natural environments. So the Forest Service proposes in the early 50s, well, why don't we put a ski resort in Mineral Valley? Interestingly, the idea of Mineral Valley came from David Brower down here, the executive director of the Sierra Club. The original idea that was proposed was fairly minor, but then it quickly escalated. So when Walt Disney brought their proposal forward, it was completely beyond anything the Sierra Club had ever been thought was reasonable. So they immediately switched from promoting the valley to opposing any development. To make this story short, it then wound its way through the courts, and eventually, after a number of decisions, the final decision was that yes, the development could go ahead. By that time, the negative publicity in the press, largely driven by the Sierra Club, was so bad that the Disney Corporation just walked away from it. Out of this came the interesting concept raised by Christopher Stone here of the idea of the rights of nature, that a river, that a tree, and so his famous paper, Should Trees Have Standing, is a classic amongst environmental literature. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Walt Disney loves skiing. He never would have supported the destruction of that valley, but a year or two into this whole development, he died. And so Walt Disney drove it forward based on the memory of him. The Sierra Club went from one side of promoting it to opposing it, and the legal system got very involved. So the issue with Mineral King is the complexity with which environmental issues evolve. And the reason I raise this is that when we talk about water, I've often said the people who really value water in southern Alberta in particular are the irrigation districts. They more so than anybody need good quality water delivered on a regular basis. They have more need to make sure that water is preserved. And the point I'm simply trying to make is that you need to understand what drives people in terms of making the decisions. And although the irrigation districts, a number of the people who run them, I know reasonably well, might be opposed to any restrictions and want more dams built, in a way, they have the same need that we have, which is simply to protect those watersheds. So I simply finish by saying the people who you think are your enemies may well not be your enemies. They may be your partners in solving a problem. And so think long and hard about who you need to embrace both as your partners and your opponents, because in the end, it may turn out you actually all have a very, very common interest. So I think, let me finish one final point. About 4 or 5 years ago, when I was finishing up at the U of A, I gave a couple of talks on climate change. And they were kind of met with the standard ho-hum. But I pointed out to these people, and this was 2018, 2000, I said, there's a guy, Jim Bendel, who has basically suggested that the idea that we're going to see a nice progression to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100 is completely unrealistic. And you could see rapid changes over very short periods of time, things that just shocked us. And the reason I raise this point is if you go back 5 years and you start thinking about the wildfire situation, you might make the case that he was somewhat prophetic, because 5 years ago, none of us would have predicted the kind of wildfire situation we had a couple of years ago. And quite frankly, I think this year we're headed into exactly the same thing. So I'll end there. My apologies for taking any more time than necessary.
Oh, absolutely, Alan. And we could probably use more, but I suspect people are starting to trail off now, although we've still got the original 190 or so, 160 people left. So great job, everybody, in keeping them on board. Now, just a couple of, there are a few questions, and we can go till 9, I think, hold people till 9, and anybody can stay as long as they want. But anyhow, there are a few questions, but I just wanted to mention a few housekeeping things while people are here. And that would be in the context of talking to Eagle, if he's still around. Eagle, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Great, Eagle. Thanks a lot for staying up. Okay, so I had a couple of things that could be put on the chat and that people could I'd sent out to my references from the talk that I did. And so that could be put onto the chat later if you wish. I've sent that document to you. And also sort of action items. Hopefully people will be taking their own notes, but I'd like to put together something that people could say, well, this is what we could practically do instead of just being highly entertained by these great speakers tonight. We can follow up and do something, maybe be involved in the Alberta Water Act or the FITFR or something. That's always my goal here, is to get people involved. So would it be possible, I should maybe be asking you these questions after, Eagle, but would it be possible to load that information before the recording goes on the national website?
Are you talking about the reference articles for Prairie Water?
Yeah, the reference articles, but also, sort of action items. Those
Yeah.
things can be put on later, I guess.
Oh, I see. The reference is it's too many words to fit in the chat, so I'll have to send that out with the email on Monday.
Okay, and just wondering what I could fit in there, but anyhow, there are a few questions, and I think still, if we can hang on, we've got another 8 minutes here till 9 o'clock, and I guess 11 out east. So yeah, I'll just see what we've got here on the Q&A, and maybe we could just finish off with that. There's only two left there, but oh boy, these are.
Can I throw a comment in while you're looking at that, Richard?
Yeah, well, I'll let you jump into the questions.
I was thinking that, and it came up in the last presentation. Another thing that is really important, but it's down the road, is ecosystem rights. And I sort of put myself forward 30 years and had a conversation. Can you believe that environment had no legal rights back then? But I mean, it's really an important issue. Silver Donald Cameron was a champion of it, and it's something that we really need to consider, the rights of the ecosystem, legal rights of the ecosystem. And the other thing is, with respect to irrigation districts, I mean, I think it was Richard who said something about the value of water in California. Well, I think you were quoting the irrigation value, which is way lower than the actual value of that water that's being used in other ways. And to use water to produce rice and almonds in a state which is water short is just plain ridiculous. And I mean, these irrigation districts have their rights. I'm certainly, as an agrologist, I'm super supportive of farmers' need for water, but you've got to look at the use of that water and the needs of the community and the drainage basin too.
Well, I'll let you guys keep talking amongst yourselves. You wish you're the ones who know what you're talking about. And I've heard this story about almonds and the intensive use. So there's an idea for here is one of the, I think the agrologist or agrologist, sorry, Wendy. Agrologist that I mentioned earlier did talk about different types of crops and how some crops are just much more water intensive. And I don't know if anybody has anything to say on that. That there could be some changes in crops. I'm hearing all kinds of things about growing more potatoes just so that McCain's can have its way as a large corporation. That sort of thing. Use a lot of water, but I don't know anything about it
That's a complex question. I just wanted to make the comment with respect to California that they're using water that they're being charged very little for crops that are very high water using crops. And think about your purchases as a consumer. Anyway, onward. You probably have some
Right.
questions.
Peter has a question there. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I wonder if we could get just maybe a final comment, one or two final comments from each of the speakers, and we can commit to getting back to people who have signed up with this. We'll go through the questions and the notes and the comments. I think it's all very rich, and if we could spend some time and reflect back. And I'm not sure what we can promise, in terms of follow up and everything else, but I think there's been a lot of interest in the comments, and if we can get some last comments, I'm just blown away by all of the speakers, and then we can get back to the participants.
Sounds like a plan. Peter, assuming that our speakers are not completely tired out and have not said everything they want to say, but yeah, final comments. Maybe start with you, Trish.
Trisha, you have kids. I think you should go first because you probably gotta go and take care of them.
Oh, they're already in bed long time ago. It's all good. Yeah, no, I put a couple of things in the chat because I'm a firm believer in action and grassroots action. And honestly, this is not like, I guess the final thoughts I'd like to leave it with is that it's a very complex issue because it has to do with the intersection of a lot of these challenges that we've talked about and the fact that we need to think long term, which quite frankly, our government, our policies, and our politicians are not set up to do, nor are we for that matter. We're really kind of terrible at that. But I really need people to think long term on this. And I really need people to follow the discussion. And I put a few resources in there where you can follow this discussion. And I encourage you all to stay engaged and to follow up because it's going to take all of us to address this.
Whoever else wants to just jump in now.
Okay, I'll take a shot at it. Echoing a bit of what Tricia said, I think it's really important to engage people at sort of an individual level. I'll give you one example. I was chatting with a gentleman who's very involved in one of the irrigation districts, and he's a great fisherman. And I said, there's this issue of these East Coast, the Eastern slopes and the rivers coming out of there, and selenium if there's a lot of mining. And so I just asked him, I said, have you ever tested the selenium levels in the fish that you're fishing? And because it's hard, it's very difficult to approach people with very direct questions about things that are important to them around irrigation. You often have to come in from a slightly different angle. So the point, and he said, no, I haven't tested that. I said, well, it'd be interesting to know if, selenium levels actually increased once they start mining. And I could see his brain sort of engaging. So I would suggest to people that it's often those day-to-day conversations you have about water, about, is there a nice fishing, where I currently live in Ontario. So I'm very interested in local swimming holes. Is the quality of water in the local swimming hole the kind that you'd want your kids to go in? So if you can keep it to very local issues, but get people to think hard about how they impact on them. And the value of that is you can often do that with people who you don't necessarily have that much in common. So the individual I was chatting with, I have no idea of his political leanings, but I suspect he was highly conservative. But he cares whether or not there's selenium in the fish he's pulling out of that lake. And so this is the way I would suggest, as we all go out and talk to our friends and neighbors, is see if you can find an angle that relates to them directly, but is non-threatening, and that makes them understand the value of this resource, not only in quantity, which is largely what we've been discussing, but clearly also in quality, right? And so what I try and do with my neighbors, I mean, I spent 32 years in Edmonton. I love Alberta. I like to spend as much time as I can there, as Peter can attest to. But now I live in Eastern Ontario, and I try and focus on getting my neighbors to think about how water is important to them. And so I leave it at that.
Thank you, Alan. You're muted, Wendy.
That was because my dog in the background was chatting. I agree completely with Tricia. Groundwater is super important, and we need to look at that. Indigenous, the intersection between Indigenous rights and community rights and drainage basin rights and all of these things have to be really clearly understood. And I mean, the right for Indigenous communities to have clean water, we recognize that, but also with respect to the larger issues. And thirdly, I would think that I would challenge people to learn about their drainage basin. Where does your water come from? What feeds this drainage basin? Where is it flowing out from? What are the boundaries of the drainage basin? What are the risks to the drainage basin? What is your municipality, regional district doing to make people aware of their drainage basin? And when you start on that micro level, I think that you develop a community between people and their water systems that can be sort of trampolined into much stronger action as you go out. Thank you for doing this. It's been a good webinar.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess our time is up and we still got 130 people want to hear more, but so I'll just say my final comment here and let Peter, as the MC, I don't know, lead us out of here. But yeah, so there will be stuff on the chat and that'll be available next week, resources. And thank you so much to the participants, the folks out in cyberspace there. And I don't know what, to get you the speakers together sometime. I'd sure be glad to share a glass of fresh water with you, maybe in some other form. But what can we say? Just awesome that you were willing to do this, and I know you're busy people, and thanks so much. So
Thank
Peter,
you.
I'll let you have the final word.
Thank you, Richard.
It's great. Thank you.
Okay, I won't take any more time. Just reiterate what Richard said and thank everybody and thank Richard for collecting such a great group of speakers. It's just so rich. There's so much there. Eagle, all the comments you'll be able to capture those, save those for us.
Yes, I will. Yep.
Okay, great.
Thanks for all your work behind the curtain, Eagle.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah.
Awesome, Eagle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
So
I'm going to shut down now. Have a good
Thanks,
night,
everybody.
So I'll make one final comment. You do know we're going into overtime, guys.
Oh, yay.
Oh, no, no, no,
so
no, 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 no. There are people that are taping it.
Bye.
So the Oilers pull it out of the